Welcome to Anthropology 232 in the spring of 2021. I'm Jan English-Lueck, and I've created this little mini lecture to help orient you to the class project. In the past, we have cooperated with the Nissan Research Labs and the Alliance Silicon Valley Research Center to look at the impact of autonomous vehicles on streetscapes. This semester, I want to turn our attention to an entirely different domain, particularly a domain that is relevant to your individual lives and accessible to you as researchers during these pandemic containment times. And in this project, we're going to look at study spaces that have changed as a result of the pandemic. And those study spaces include public spaces such as libraries or the kinds of spaces that San Jose State has created or that community colleges have created for particular populations like the Undocu-Spartan Study Center. How have those spaces changed during COVID? How have public library spaces changed during COVID? And most importantly, how have your own individual work from home study spaces changed? What are the patterns that we see in the kinds of changes that have taken place? And in this project, we'll have a number of different timelines. In this project, we will have a number of different milestones relevant to our timeline, starting with fairly early on, in which we will create our teams and try to understand whether we'll work as a single class team or as two adjoining complementary teams. We'll make those decisions in those first few weeks, and by February 16th, we will finalize our teams. And then I would like you to work on a proposal for what kinds of things you want to research on this topic and document. The final project is a video, but the video should include original research. Since I have to vet that research through the IRB, we need to determine our projects early in the semester, and then refine our methods and collect data. Throughout April, I'd like us to have conversations about what we're seeing, the patterns that we're seeing in terms of the design elements of services, spaces, technologies, artifacts relevant to the topic at hand. And then I would like you to practice two kinds of deliverables appropriate to applied anthropologists. Those include blogs, short, concrete, highly illustrated, clear statements about research that are very different than an article, and video. And we'll discuss how our individual video productions can culminate in a larger project and what will happen with that project. Now, I've created some research questions to help orient you to the question of what has changed in our study spaces during the pandemic times. And these include understanding the activities, the social contexts, the structures of meaning and value associated with study spaces, and how infrastructural and policy contexts have changed. For example, as institutions, we have tried to create public common study spaces to help level the playing field for people who are first generation to college or from particular identity groups that can use mutual support for student success. How have those policies shifted during this time? What has happened to those instantiations of those policies? And who are the stakeholders that govern the entire ecosystem of the activity of study? Not just the direct immediate stakeholders, but the ones in the background, such as the administrators at San Jose State. Are there possible service and design ecologies that would have an impact on study spaces in the future? How would you know if a study service or a study technology or study artifact was instituted? How would you know that this was meaningful? What kinds of metrics make sense to different kinds of audiences? An administrator in the university would look at things one way, and a family member of a student would look at things entirely differently. What are the different kinds of metrics that are meaningful? Now, we're going to, in the course of this semester, look at vernacular landscapes, and study spaces are vernacular landscapes used in everyday life. So what's at stake at either preserving or transforming common study areas and the activities linked with them? What happens when we change what happens in a library and how that library is positioned within a community? Who would be community advocates that could be given a voice? How could you mobilize communities, student communities, residential communities, educational communities, to be given a greater voice? What kinds of things do you think would work? And then I always want you to be mindful of what kinds of theoretical frameworks are you using in any research project to interrogate a phenomenon. Now, I've created a sort of sample. This is by no means the final word, but I want you to think about what are some examples of unequal interaction with study spaces. You've got different populations which have known vulnerabilities. People with disabilities, people who are first gen or have historic exclusion, or people who no longer can come to their workplaces, remote workers, remote scholars. And I want you to think as an anthropological designer. What are the processes that we're looking at that could be affected by the changes that occurred during the pandemic? And everything from access to difficulty of having emotions or experiencing frustration or having to navigate the needs and the wants of other household members. How have those things affected this experience? And what are the settings in which we would examine these kinds of phenomena? Now, we want to make sure that we are conducting all of our research in a COVID-safe way. So in many ways, the focus of your attention cannot easily be observation of public spaces. That may occur during the course of the semester. We may open up our libraries again. We may open up those study spaces, but I don't want you to rely on that. There are images, of course, that you can collect from the past. You can certainly have some sense of how those study spaces have changed over the course of the pandemic. And you certainly can understand what has happened to personal work and study spaces. And so the tools that you'll be using are largely going to be digital interview, social media analysis. Maybe you'll be able to engage in some structured or participant observations by asking people to film their own experience and harvest the information that you get from that. So over the course of this project, as an overview, you'll have to be thinking about what is the research objective that you and your research team have. What are you identifying? What is the phenomena you're identifying? And what are you trying to do with that phenomena? Now, I've already given you your deliverable. You're going to create blogs and you're going to create videos. So given that you're trying to create a story that might have relevance to many different stakeholders, you'll be thinking about what is the kind of material you'll need to collect. And that material collection needs to reflect both the rigor of you as researchers. You have to have good sampling strategies, good recruitment strategies, decent data collection, excellent data analysis. But you also are creating a story. You're not only being researchers, but storytellers. And so you'll be approaching your project with this in mind. I want to give you an overview that over the course of this semester, we'll be brainstorming different ideas of what it means, and we'll start with your own experiences. We'll be treating you almost like a focus group. How have your lives changed? How have your study habits changed over the course of the pandemic? And then we'll start, once we've brainstormed a list of potential impacts, where are the commonalities? Can we refine our lens so that we're looking more closely at particular phenomena? Then think about breaking into teams. So hopefully this little video mini lecture will give you a sense of what we're trying to accomplish.